Hey guys, what's up? Evan with Stock Music Musician, and today I'm going to be doing a long requested feature, mastering in Reason. So, I'm not an expert masterer by any stretch of the imagination, but what I want to show you is sort of how to use the features of Reason to get the most out of your master. And, there's going to be better tutorials on actually mastering. Other people out there have done them. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make the best mastering tutorial. I'm trying to make a good tutorial for mastering in Reason. So with that said, the first thing you want to do, and this is just an absolute must, is take your mix and bounce it down to 2 channels by going to File, Export Song as Loop or as Audio File. It's absolutely essential that you master in a separate file for a couple of reasons. The first is that you need to get the start points and the end points of your track perfect when you master. That's a big part of mastering, so that there's not 3 seconds of silence at the beginning or at the end. And when you're mixing, sometimes you need to have silence at the beginning to trigger a MIDI note, for example, that takes a while to evolve. Or sometimes you just have silence because you weren't paying attention. Similarly, at the end, I find it's often better when I'm exporting a song from mixing to have extra space at the back so that I can make sure that all of my reverb tails die out. But you can't really tell the exact spot where things die out in the mixing project file. You have to bounce it to stereo to make sure that actually that you can tell exactly where all the parts are. Another thing is that this just gives you one more chance to do quality control, to check to make sure that you didn't have something weirdly muted or something turned off. This just gives you another chance to listen to your mix without the distraction of mixing. So you bounce out your mix and then you have it here. You would go to the mixes and you drag it onto the sequencer here. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is make the tempo of your mastering song the same tempo as your original song. So I know, because I named the title 108 BPM, that I want it to be at 108 BPM. Not only will this, if you end up applying certain time-based effects, which you usually won't, but occasionally you might want to, not only will it make that work better, but it will also make the grid line up so that if you do any editing, that will be easier. Then you want to make sure that you disable stretch so that the song plays back at the right volume. So the first thing I do then is go to this waveform size thing here and make the waveform as big as possible, and then also zoom in horizontally just so I can really see what's going on. And so now let's zoom in here and we'll snap to the grid, one of the great new Reason 10.2 features, and we can see there's quite a few seconds of silence here at the beginning. So the very first thing I do is chop that off, and let's see where that sounds. Perfect. Now let's slide everything forward. Double check one more time. Great. Now let's go to the end. And trust me, this is some of the most important stuff about mixing. Or mastering. It's not about levels and compression and EQ. If your song starts or ends, like here, let's say I didn't bounce it with the right tail. That sounds horrible, even if I had everything else done perfectly. So, and the natural tail here is actually probably fine. I will just do a slight fade. No, that's too much of a fade, actually. There we go. Okay, so I want to take a second right now to remind you that I've got a free sample pack that you can download. There's I don't know, maybe 10, 15 samples there that I've made. Free for you to use however you want. I'll put a link down below to that, just as a thank you for watching this channel and for making a suggestion for this video. It's something I know I should have done a long time ago. So okay, now let's start actually doing the more sexy part of mastering. So what you're going to want to do is set the loop point. You're going to want to set up a loop at the loudest part of your song. That's the part that you're going to want to work on while mastering so that you get all the levels right. And just eyeballing, seems to be the densest part of the peaks. I mean, I know it because I did the song, and usually it's the climax, the last chorus. So now let's. And I guess we need to go one bar more, otherwise it's just going to get annoying as it loops. Anyway, we're not going to loop it too much. So the next thing we're going to do, and this is really important, is install the monitoring. This is a free plugin here called K-Meter. I'll put a link down to this at the bottom by Martin Zuther. It's free. You should absolutely download it. Open it up. Hit the Keep Open tab so that it'll stay open. And then you're going to want to click on K14. So this is a slightly different type of monitor or meter from what comes with Reason, because here the zero mark is actually -14 when you select K14, and then the +14 is actually 0 dB. And so if you use this, it allows you to make sure that you don't clip, but you have a nice consistent sound. And also you're going to want to change it to RMS, and you can do peaks. So let's start playing and you'll see. So in mixing, I like to have the peaks right in yellow, but when you go to the mastering stage, you want to try and get the actual average part of the song close to the yellow, which is still -14 dBs, and then avoid peaking. Now the next thing I want to say is that 95% of the things in Reason I think you can do with the stock plugins, just buying third-party plugins that can simplify things or help, but and I want to put the maximizer before the stereo meter, but I don't think Reason's maximizer is actually usable for mastering. This is one of the few tools where I think you really need to buy a third-party plugin, and the reason for that is that this maximizer doesn't let you set a peak ceiling, which means with a quality brick wall limiter, you can set an amount and it will never let anything through it, so you won't get any clipping. And if you have ever had a song that clips, it's horrific. Like, you spend all this time and then you upload it and suddenly you realize, wow, my song clips, and then you have to perhaps go through the whole process. Maybe certain sites won't even let you take it down easily, or you've already promoted it. It's really a pain in the ass. So you need to get a piece, basically a brick wall limiter that lets you set a maximum value. I like to use Ozone. I think Ozone probably is the best all-around mastering program, period, end of story. There's others that are great, but Ozone is totally affordable. It's like the basic version, it's like $140 or something. I'll put a link down to Plugin Boutique because they have some specials often. And if you don't have it, I think it's probably the only plugin that I would really say you have to have, that you have to buy. And so now we'll open up Ozone here. We're not going to use any of the presets, although they're good, but I don't think that's really what we want to go for here. So the first thing, Ozone runs a bunch of miniature plugins inside of it. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the maximizer, and this is what I'm talking about here. There's this ceiling control, and I like to set it to -1.1. That means that no matter what I do, this limiter will never let a sound get louder than 1.1 decibels. And the reason you don't want to go to 0 is because a lot of streaming sites, Spotify, SoundCloud, Pond5, lots of places will convert your song from like an MP3 or a wave into their proprietary or just a different format for streaming efficiency. And when they do that, little weird artifacts creep in and assumptions are made, and you can actually end up clipping based on how that happens. So by setting a ceiling of 1.1, you can guarantee that you're going to have a good sound. It will be competitively loud. It's not going to be the loudest thing on the block, but it will be loud enough, and you'll never run into a situation where you upload it and find that you've clipped. And so then you have, I think the first and most important thing when you mix is to get, or when you master, is to get the volume part dialed in first, because then everything else is fine tuning. Although you then have to go back and dial it in a bit later. So there's 4 modes here, some with sub modes. So we'll start playing. Oh, and the thing I want to tell you is this line here, it'll duck when it's actually performing a limiting action. So the threshold brings up the volume, basically. And there I just totally clipped you guys. So what I'm going to do, I apologize, there might be some clipping for the next second or two while I get the volumes dialed in. That looks like that should be a good mix of volume for you and for me. So what I want to do is still have some ability to bring this up further. But let's just, I've basically just added 12 decibels, 12.7 decibels to the signal. And so let's look at the K meter now. So you see part of it's going into the red, like the main the things that go up here are the peaks, right? And then the yellow is, the lower number is sort of the average. And so you want the average solidly in the yellow, but you don't want it going into the red. So we've already added too much. Set. And here are the peaks. This is probably, I would guess, truly, we'll go back to a normal scale now. See the peak, 1.1. That's right here. The ceiling is actually, even though it doesn't show much limiting going on, there are some inner peak spaces where it's clearly keeping everything below 1.1. All right, now there's 4 different modes here. This is a modern sounding song, so let's just see what this does. They tend to be more transparent. But since not a ton of compression is going on, I don't know that we'll hear much. Okay. And we want this to be a little more transparent. Then what you can do afterwards, if you feel like you've taken out too much dynamics through this process, is add transients in afterwards. But frankly, this song, there's not much compression going on yet, so I don't think there's any reason to do that. I've also unlinked the stereo fields a little bit just so that both sides can kind of be as loud as they need to be. Now, what you can do is insert all sorts of other modules in here along the way. So what I'm going to do is first do an equalizer. And I could do this part you could do just as well with the Reason equalizer. I think the equalizer on Ozone is better than the stock Reason one, but the stock Reason one is fine. It does a very good job. And so this equalizer, I'm going to try and just pick out a few bad frequencies. And by doing this, I'm going to increase the Q and increase the gain, and then sweep along until I find a couple bad sounding frequencies. Now I'm using headphones and I can't hear great out of them, I just want to say, so this is not going to be the best sounding master. And I'm just trying to show you the things you should look for. Digital gives a much clearer response, and analog is sort of a more old-fashioned way. But I think for cutting, digital tends to work better. Surgical mode also is better for cutting. But we can just try, proportional Q also can be helpful. We'll go with peak, and now we'll just sweep along till we find something. Usually there's something around 200. Here you hear it. Just everything there sounds bad, like a lot of different parts do. So we'll cut like a dB. You really don't want to be doing more than a dB of cuts on any one thing. And now we'll look for another high frequency that's off. We'll start where we left off. Almost every band is going to resonate, but what I'm looking for is something that instead of going shh, 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 kind of goes straight like the whole time. Like there's just this frequency here just sounds all the way bad. So we'll take another dB from that. And these cues we want to keep narrow, so let's listen on and off. Ever so slightly. Okay. The next thing I want to do is, now they have this is an absolutely fantastic imager. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't, but I really think you should do imaging choices when you're in the mixing stage, like put a stereo widener on just the strings or the chorus, not doing it on the whole mix. So I'm probably going to skip that, but I'm going to try the exciter. This simulates tape and all sorts of other things. And I think probably since this song is pretty hot to begin with, we might want to go with some tape just to tighten up the low end and also smooth out the high end. So I'm gonna put, I guess, a little bit in the middle just so it doesn't sound weird. This is just a starting guess. The next thing I'm gonna do is tell it to learn the bandwidths. So it automatically adjusts. Really gotta. I want to hear what they're doing to the high, and I can solo. Actually, I think that's probably right there. And then let's hear what. That actually provides a nice little bit of drive on the low end. Okay, now let's add a dynamics. This is a multi-band compressor here. So we're going to have it learn the bands, and then we can set the attack and release and all of that. Although I tend to just go with a well, actually, the one thing I want to try first is because I don't believe I have a stereo bus on it. So the first thing I'm going to try is actually a Waves SSL Comp. This is a great compressor here. I use it. It's just a better version of the one that Reason comes with, a little more accurate. And Dave Pensato's one setting just always works. Slow attack, fast release. Set the threshold. Let's just A/B it with that compressor on and off, and then we'll go to the multi-band compressor just to tame. I think it's the snare that sounds, I don't want to do all the bands, but the snare sounds just a little too pokey. And that whole mid-range area. So. To me, it sounds both more dynamic. The compressor actually does make it pump a little more rhythmically because the settings, just how it works, and the way it's dialed in. And then also, it is adding a slight amount of gain and a slight amount of distortion, but not a sizable amount of gain. 1.5, that's about what it's compressing. So, dynamics, we want to put this before the maximizer. And there's also limiters here if you had a really troublesome thing that you wanted to tame, but that's not, I don't think that's this song. And so, what I'm going to first, again, I like we're doing a fast, or a 30-second, I think, what is it, a 30-second release here? Yeah, 30-second attack and a 0.1 second release. So slow attack, fast release, and I think that's probably still what we want to do here, but maybe we'll slow it down just a little bit. Yeah. This is just my starting spot, but it's probably about right. And like I said, I might do a little bit on all the bands, but really I'm just trying to target that snare band. But you can do it differently on all of them. And you can also do all of them in parallel. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit learn, so it'll get the right crossover points. Let's start here, because there's some powerful energy there. Turn up the ratio to 3. Maybe take half a dB off. You can see how much is being taken off there. And we'll add half a dB. Nope. 0.5 dB of makeup gain. Let's see about another. Let's try the next band. And this here is showing how much gain reduction is going on. But we have this band solo. Probably more like a half dB. You can also do filtering on it, so certain things don't. here again. Go. And now I want to turn this on and off, and what you'll hear is like the fat side of the snare, and the rhythm comes out a bit more, with it being a slightly less pokey and in your face. So I'll turn the dynamics on and off. And on the low end, honestly, I'm not going to do anything because it's a very consistent and repetitive low end, and it is what it is. I don't think a compressor is really going to do much work there. The high end, there might be some... Yeah. And I'm not going to do makeup gain here. I'm just trying to tame. Now you see we creep up a little bit. Peaks are still full. We're right where we want to be. And so now you can consider adding another EQ, just to make up for some of the things you've lost. I think it sounds pretty much where I want it to sound. We'll try the imager. Sometimes it sounds great. Sometimes it really makes things whooshy and out of place and phony. So we'll learn the crossover points, and then we'll try tightening the bottom and spreading the top just a bit. Spread of everything. So now what we're going to do, that actually seems to have opened it up just a little bit. So what I'm going to do, iZotope, Ozone has this great feature here, this ear, where when you bypass it, it doesn't bypass really the maximizing. It keeps the level the same sort of, so you can make sure that the changes you're doing are actually for the better. So we'll try bypassing with this ear thing on, and then we'll see. This should be pretty much the same volume. Sounds much duller, less dynamic, and smaller. Alright, so we're going to go over an overview, and I'll explain everything again in detail, but I do want to ask you to take a second to like and subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in really learning more about music production and producing in Reason and all of that. And also be sure to leave a comment below about what you'd like to learn more of, and also be sure to get that sample pack and also pick up Ozone. I think it's really necessary for mastering, or at least a really good shortcut for mastering, and having a maximizer is definitely, a brick wall limiter is absolutely essential. Also get this K meter, it's free, it's awesome. One other thing, I'm using Ozone 7, Ozone 8 is now available, so you might want to check that out. But let's go back to the very beginning. So what did we do here? We imported it, we trimmed out this both the beginning and the end so that it was clearer and it started at the right time. And we also stretched the tempo. What we're going to want to do is listen to this ending here, because these could be really loud. I mean, we've got the limiter, but I want to make sure they sound right. Really what you'd want to do if you're doing this is you'd want to listen to the entire song at once just to make sure everything is copacetic. So we're monitoring on the K meter to keep ourselves in the yellow range. That's where we want the average to be. And the peak limiter will keep the peaks in check. Then we put an SSL Comp on just to do a couple of dB of very rhythmic, warm. This is the way it's plugging up with it. And then we put on Ozone. And the first thing we did was do an EQ where we just made 2 small cuts. We'll try this on and off again, and we'll see what you think. Cleans it up. An exciter, which just does some beautiful distortion and saturation on the low and the highs. Hear how it thickens it up? But it thickens it up, but it also tames the highs and it brings out the lows a little bit. And that's based on just how much of this I've added in. Turn on multiband compressor. And I actually have noticed occasionally on the hard hits, this does come in, so I'll lower it just a little bit. And this way, low frequencies have a lot of energy to them, so this way the maximizer won't have to work quite as hard. But I'm really not doing much there. And then we've got the imager. Finally the maximizer. I could make it way louder, but this is a good volume here, to be honest. There's no need to do anything else. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna want to turn on dithering. And I don't really understand much of this, but my understanding is that the dithering, which is what happens when you convert file formats, on Ozone is way better than what comes stock with Reason. I always work in 24-bit. Here's you could limit the peaks here if you wanted to, which could help. There's a lot you can do, but I don't really understand it nearly enough to know, so but you can simulate what it would sound like. I don't know what any of this does, so I should just stop the video now. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, if you learned something, be sure to like and subscribe. I know it was long, but hopefully it was useful. And then when you get to the end, you just do export song as audio file. And what you're going to want to do is turn dither off, because you're doing the dithering through the Ozone plugin. All right, thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.